Here's why I plan to make 15 citizenships happen, and how you likely won't need 15, but should probably get 2. Welcome back to the Travel Reports, and today essentially I wanted to go over why I am looking at genuinely getting 15 citizenships. Now, I won't promote exactly which citizenships I get and when I get them. I will state that I am attempting to go to Poland, as Poland is a country that I find particular connection to in this increasingly hostile world to what Poland's mentality is. However, with dual citizenship, many people think that it's solely to, escape taxes or escape accountability for actions. Well, I'm accountable for my actions. I'm not a person who breaks laws. I'm not a person who tries to be someone I'm not. I certainly have done some things that I regret in the past. However, nothing illegal, nothing out of the ordinary for someone who is young and dumb. And it's with that I believe becoming more of a global-minded person, especially in 2025, where increasingly the amount of people who believe in these goals and believe in these things is growing, and people are increasingly seeing the crackdown on these things. With that being the case, it becomes more important than ever to build a life that is more globally minded and more safe. And that's realistically what I'm doing about it, and why I'm going about it is safety. And building a safe place and safe bases that many will never have. And increasingly, global geopolitics is showing that having just one citizenship is increasingly restrictive. More and more countries are actually receptive to that fact and are opening dual citizenship pathways. Now, I think that also serves their interests. They don't want them to get rid of their home country's citizenship. However, that can also be a double-edged sword for these governments, and especially if they turn more and more authoritarian, it becomes almost a necessity to have a dual passport portfolio. Now, my 15 passport goal is perhaps a little bit insane, and perhaps built somewhat on paranoia more than it is reasonableness. However, I also just enjoy the process of collecting passports and going and creating new ties to new countries. So it's with that, though, that you realize that inherently your ability to create a life, and especially after the mobilizations in Russia, it shows that just one passport is not enough anymore. And your ability to go places is inherently being defunct right in front of your eyes. And it's whether or not you are able to become safe, which for many is becoming increasingly not possible. I'm not saying there's going to be another, North Korean style takeover of a country, but there's nothing that inherently says there won't be either. And so inherently authoritarianism becomes it's a slippery slope. You want to love your country and you want to spend time in a country that you can call trustable. However, as I've been dealing with things, there's been less and less trust towards governments, towards how things operate. And especially in the United States, I think that was the tipping point for many people, where you have a lot more people that are realizing that systems in place won't always have impact and won't always be the savior you think they will be. Now, I left the United States under Joe Biden. I don't have any plans of going back. I left part-time in 2022 and then full-time in 2023. However, it's with these things that you realize that blind nationalism and blind love for a country doesn't inherently make that country better. Growing your passport portfolio and making your life easier through those passport portfolios inherently makes you a lot safer, so to speak, as you grow and live in different countries and so forth. As realistically, right, the amount of time I've spent outside of the United States, I've learned a lot. I've grown a lot as a person, and additionally, I know better who to trust and how to trust, which is not something that a lot of Americans can say. A lot of Americans I've met blindly trust people, and I can tell you as an American, that's a horrible way to go about life. However, it's not something I blame you for inherently, and I know that there's almost a necessity in the U.S. societally to have someone you trust, to have friends, to have social connection in a way that there isn't in Eastern Europe or Asia. You can be insular in these societies more so than you can in the United States, and you can distrust people more than you can in the United States. And it's with that that I know that, for me, I recommend everyone get 2 citizenships, and if you can, 3, because you're diversifying your interests, you're growing your potential investment horizons, you're creating an ability to live your life on your terms as opposed to the terms of the U.S. government or the German government or wherever you're from. I know I talk a lot about the United States, however, obviously that's where I'm from. I know that there's not just the United States that is turning authoritarian. I work with a lot of Ukrainians, and even though I wouldn't say Ukraine is inherently authoritarian, there are some issues, and the same with Russia, and the same with even smaller countries like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. There are certain levels that, the government tolerates, and there are certain levels that the government doesn't tolerate. And it's with that you become a little bit disillusioned with these countries, because you want freedom, you want optionality, and you can't get that if the government is constantly at your throat creating issues. While I think that there is a place for laws, and especially democracy, I do not believe that these things are becoming inherently easy to deal with, and I also think that some of the laws that people can come up with are inherently restrictive and inherently moving towards tyranny, which in the grand scheme of things obviously do everything legally. I'm not inherently saying, break your country's laws. No, I can't recommend that, as it will come back to haunt you. However, what I am saying is, before things become illegal, before you have to deal with the regulatory burdens of being scared to leave the house or whatever else, as many Ukrainians or Russians are, before that happens, make a plan, make a dual, triple citizenship plan. And it doesn't have to be expensive either. You can get Armenian citizenship, for a few $1,000s. You can get so many different citizenships for different amounts of money. And while I understand that not everyone wants to go to Armenia, you don't have to stay in Armenia, which is one of the better ideals that you have, is the fact that you don't have to stay in Armenia, and you can get a medical exemption or whatever else fairly easily for military service. Or if you don't qualify for medical exemptions, there are other exemptions, or you can be a conscientious objector, which conscientious objectors are not required to do military service, and it has been a thing like that for a while. So inherently, if you are looking at creating a plan to leave, I can do a 15-minute one-on-one call. Just leave me a comment down below. I'd love to get back to you as quickly as possible. However, of course, I am recently fairly busy on the ground. I've been doing some work here, so obviously I'll get back to you as soon as possible. The amounts, though, of issues that I've seen, especially in Eastern Europe recently, towards these sorts of programs is showing me that what I do is valuable, and what I do is inherently something that is going to explode over the next 5 to 10 years. And if you're too late, and if you wait 5 to 10 years, you're only going to become able to mitigate it so long as there is political will to allow you into a country. And for many countries, there's no political will in the same way, and that becomes a detriment to immigrants that, they're not necessarily trying to go against the law. They're not trying to make anything worse than it already is. So, with that being the case, there's a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment, and not just of quote-unquote illegal immigrants, but normal immigrants too, which makes it inherently much, much worse for people trying to build their life in ways that is global, that is connected. However, what I do that not many other people do is I spend time learning which places I can go and I can really dial into. And so it's with that I truly can I can truly help with your ability to leave while you still can, as I know it's becoming increasingly common worldwide for overreach to make its way throughout the world, and not just in countries you'd expect it in. There are places in the world where you wouldn't expect it at all, and it comes true. And everyone thinks they have a plan until they're punched in the face, which makes all of the things that you thought you were going to do, that you planned to do, much harder. And instead of relying on theory, I believe that the most impactful thing to do is to rely on, instead, the fact that you can create systems now so that if things do go wrong, you can work towards having a second home in another country, being prepared for when things go bad. You don't have to plan, you can just buy a plane ticket and leave. And this is something that so many people fail to do, is implement systems for their plan. However, I don't believe you will be a victim of that. I believe that inherently you are smarter than that, and your ability to plan is much better than most. If you're looking for someone to help, again, comment down below, and I will let you know whether or not We are accepting consulting calls. It's with that I appreciate your view, and I would appreciate a comment of what you thought about this video, and yeah, like, a subscription, perhaps sharing it around to your friends. This has been the Traveling Report, and I am signing off. Bye.